Hey, what's up, everybody? We're here live and direct at Full Stack Edge Case 2023, and I'm hanging out with the awesome folks at de Nederlands Kubernetes podcast. And as you can see, my Dutch is flying.
Welkom bij een nieuwe aflevering van de Nederlandse Kubernetes podcast. De podcast over Kubernetes voor iedereen. Ik ben uw gastheer Ronald Kers en ik zit zoals altijd met...
Hey Ronald, alles goed?
Jan Stomphorst.
Oh ja. Het regent niet meer. Het is gelukkig droog op dit moment.
En nu is het droog inderdaad, ja. En we hebben wederom weer een hele mooie gast. Een special guest, Tim Jones from Talos.
Hi. Yeah.
Tim, can you introduce yourself to the listeners?
My name's Tim Jones. I'm an engineer at Sidero Labs. We don't give ourselves pretty much any title more than that because there's only 9 of us.
Oh, 9 of you. So you're senior infrastructure, SRE, engineer, something.
Yeah, I mean, one day of the week I'll be a presenter, another day of the week I'll be a salesman. I mainly focus on the operational side of the business.
Yeah.
But that, for us, also entails a lot of software engineering as well. I've only been working as an employee for like a year and a half now, but I was, our founder, when he released sort of our first product, Talos, he did a Reddit thread in the Kubernetes subreddit, and I was there, and I decided to have a go and try their software, and I loved it. I was running it in my home lab, and I started to be sort of like a community contributor to all of the open source stuff. I helped write like the first few extra configurations for the DHCP client, lots of work with Terraform to help people spin it up in their own home labs, and then I took a break. I had a child, my family expanded, I need to focus on that. Didn't have any free time to do hobbies, as you can imagine. And then once my kid was a bit older, started going to school, I got back into the community, and Andrew, the founder, came to me and said, "Hey, really glad to see you back. What's work for you like? We've just got investment. Would you like to work for us?" And so I'm one of the very, very lucky few people that actually gets paid to work on their hobby.
Oh, cool.
And
Nice.
I absolutely love what we do. So Talos is an operating system dedicated to running Kubernetes. And when I say dedicated, I mean literally there is nothing you can do on Talos other than run Kubernetes. There's no shell, there's no SSH, there's no... up until a few months ago, there wasn't even a way to look at it. The console was literally just kernel logs. Now we have a nice little dashboard so you can see the IP address and sort of the state of the machine.
Okay.
But that was like a big change for us. So yeah, it's been a crazy 5 years. We're doing reasonably well now. We've just released our first non-open source product, which is maybe causing a little bit of contention, but it's
It always is.
it's basically a management SaaS that helps you manage all of your Talos Kubernetes clusters in one place.
And that's called?
It's called Omni.
Omni.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we get back to that later.
Yeah. So Talos runs Kubernetes, and which version of Kubernetes is running? Is it full blown?
Yeah, we follow the same release cadence of Kubernetes itself. So every half year we upgrade the major version. So currently we have Talos 1.5, and that will by default install Kubernetes 127.
Yeah.
But Talos supports N-3 versions of Kubernetes. So you could, if you are still using deprecated APIs in Kubernetes, you could install the latest version of Talos with an older version of Kubernetes and it'll run fine.
And if I install Kubernetes, if I install Talos, is that then a node or a master? How?
Yeah. So Talos is very ambivalent. Each machine has its own machine config. It looks very much like your standard cloud init config or ignition config if you're way back in the CoreOS days.
Yeah.
So that machine has that config and it's set, but the way it works inside Talos is incredibly different. So we run pretty much exactly like Kubernetes does, with controllers watching that config and updating this machine state to match the config. So you would put in that config, I want this node to be a control plane.
Yeah.
And that would mean that the Talos would then spin up an etcd cluster, and it would try to form a quorum with other etcd members with the same cluster token. It would bootstrap itself. Or if you just give it the sort of the worker profile, it would just go out and find the Kubernetes endpoint, register itself as a node to that cluster, and then you can start scheduling your workloads on it straight away.
So if you install a Talos cluster, you need one master and then minimal of one one node?
No, we have a configuration setting that allows you to run to not taint the control plane node. So there's a little binary Boolean variable. It allows scheduling on control plane nodes. Yeah. I think it's a very long-winded one, but you just set that to true, and then you can just run single node clusters. Obviously, it's not a sort of a production level setup. But for
home users and
for home users, it's perfect. I actually do the same thing. I'm a little bit more crazy. I have 3 nodes, but I run them all as control planes and allow scheduling of workers on them as well. So a little bit dangerous.
Living on the edge.
But I also like to be able to do rolling updates of Talos itself. So if I'm updating a node, either Kubernetes or Talos itself, because all of my nodes are control planes, I then never get an outage. And that's very, very important when you have a wife and a kid at home that are watching something on your media server that's being hosted on Kubernetes. That's got to be highly available for them.
Yeah. I know the wife things. the wife and children needs 100% uptime and more. It's important. No,
not for me. No,
for me, it's. I don't want to have.
I can't get them off of Netflix or for YouTube. So.
Oh, but you don't have a proxy server with a Pi-hole?
No,
not even a Pi-hole.
No.
Wow.
I have Pi-hole.
Okay, I go back to my corner now.
So, if does Talos support driver port for every machine?
Because
we have a sort of semi-static kernel. We build our own kernel. We do things like enabling all the KSPP security advisories beforehand as well to get extra secure. Up until I want to say version 1.4, it was a statically built kernel, so even if there were modules available for your hardware on the Talos image, we wouldn't load them. They would have to be compiled they would have to be built in at a compile time. Recently, we enabled module loading, so we can ship a leaner kernel. And if you have extra drivers that you want, we have a way to extend the base image of Talos called system extensions. And so these are pretty much like OCI containers for Kubernetes, but for the OS level. So they are merged in with the Talos base image, which is immutable, read-only, so you cannot change it during the runtime. But during install time, we can merge these images together so you can get full control of what's on the base image of Talos, and there you can have your extra drivers that aren't compiled into the kernel, or we have people running things like a Tailscale agent or VMware.
Oh, so you can install your VMware, if it runs on VMware, your VMware guest tools also on Talos.
Exactly right. We don't comply. We don't obviously have release them in Talos by default.
No,
sure.
But we have an open source package repository with all of the community support, the things that other people want. Businesses have applied to it as well. We've had recently, I can't remember what client, we had one of our partners really need some drivers for a weird SAN Synology type setup they had. And they actually went off without our help, built their own system extension, and then came to us and said, "Hey, is this okay?" And we were like, "That's awesome. Do you mind if we publish it?" And they were like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And therefore we could just get to upload it to our repo, and therefore it'll be maintained and built for every Talos version in the future as well. We're very big proponents of open source projects as a rule. Talos was always devised to be open source. All this tooling is open source. We built a whole build system to support Talos and all of the packages that it depends on. We're doing a lot of work now for reproducible builds. I think with a change in how the Docker timestamps are logged now, we actually have, I believe, fully reproducible builds. I'd need to confirm that, but at least some parts of our system are fully reproducible already. I think we have a few edge cases of weird packages where it's spitting out some random value each build, which doesn't quite work, but we're there.
Okay. And if you look at the Talos distribution of installation, what I've understood from our previous guest is they run it on the edge, on the industrial machines, and it's packaged with K3s because it's an edge. In edge case. Well, my question is then, because we are mostly working with K8s, is that also available in Talos, or is that?
Yeah, it's not really applicable. We only really work with vanilla upstream like completely untouched Kubernetes.
The best one.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the benefits we found is that by stripping back on the operating side of things, it gives you far more resources available on your systems to then not have to compromise your Kubernetes setup. So our control planes are full etcd. Obviously, if you're running HA, we manage the quorum for you and everything like that as well. So there's no compromise in how you want to deploy. We have this on Raspberry Pis quite happily running control plane nodes, things like that, without having to go down the SQL light route or packaging all the binaries in a single place to make sure all of our stuff is pretty much straight from vanilla. We repackage them as a container for us, but otherwise the actual binary, your kubelet, your kube proxy, controller manager, all of that stuff is basically just being recompiled from the upstream sources with our signature.
Hey Jan, ik heb echt een leuk idee. Hoe zou je het vinden om in een nieuwe rubriek vragen te beantwoorden van onze luisteraars?
Nou, dat zou ik wel super tof vinden. Ik hoop dat ze wel dan echt hele leuke, moeilijke vragen aan me gaan stellen.
Nou, dat komt vast goed. Maar dan gaan we dat gewoon zeker doen. Dus heb je een vraag aan mij of Jan? Stuur deze naar vragen@k8spodcast.nl en wie weet beantwoorden we jouw vraag in de volgende aflevering.
Wil jij de wereld van Kubernetes veroveren? Of ben jij die held die alle klanten wil redden? Bij ACC ICT gaan we de uitdaging aan. Wij vechten met onze collega's tegen het Kubernetes onrecht. Dus wees niet bang en help ons naar een mooie cloud-native wereld. Ga naar werkenbij.accict.com en word een Kubernetes hero.
You said it's small, but how small?
I think the ISO...
By numbers.
The
Figures, numbers.
The ISO is somewhere between 80 and 85 megabytes.
Okay, and
to install.
To install, that's the binary. But how much memory does it take?
Talos?
Yeah.
Talos, I don't know off the top of my head,
approximately,
but approximately we're in the realms of less than 100 megaram occupant. I think we had one guy actually blowing up our Slack the other day because he had a 16 gigabyte RAM machine, and he was able to use Kubernetes as a single control plane node and allocate like 15.9 gigabytes to his pods, and he was just like, "What? How is that possible?" And we were like, "Well, I mean, you can do it, but don't forget that the kernel itself still needs like file cache, IO cache, stuff like that. So you can do it, but don't push it too far." But like I said, Talos is essentially like three components. It's containerd. It's it's not even like we control a containerd. We have a containerd for the OS components. So for the kubelet, the etcd, and the core components, and everything else in Kubernetes runs in its own containerd.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the only sort of compromise we make. But we found the separation of concerns really helps with debugging. It really helps with any problematic issues. You can't have a bad actor in your Kubernetes cluster ruining your OS containers.
No, that was my next question. But
He knew.
Because now I sometimes log into a node of Kubernetes to do some debugging for network or iSCSI. Do you support also iSCSI connections like that? Or
we have an iSCSI system extension. It's not built into the core because again, it's a pretty heavy module, so we want to make it optional.
But then debugging then. If I want to debug on a node, and I have lots of Kubernetes clusters, so sometimes something happens. How do I do that?
Yeah, you don't.
Okay, next question.
I'm done. Bye bye.
I mean, probably one of our biggest support issues, certainly from the community, is that sort of loss of knowledge during debugging. I've been a system admin in one form or another for more than 20 years now. You kind of have to change your thinking, just as Kubernetes changed how people think, how they deploy and maintain their applications. Talos does the same thing to your operating system. So yes, there's no interactivity in Talos itself. Obviously, there is an API. You can hit that API endpoint. You can read anything on the file system. So there's no LSPCI, but obviously you can do an LS on proc and see all of your things that way. You can see, the sys dev and sys are all there. They have all of the information. It's just not as clean. The more time we have to improve, like the CLI tool that we bundle with Talos. We did add a sort of a hardware layer, so LSPCI kind of is now emulated within the Talos control binary. But yeah, if you wanted any tooling like that, your best bet is always to run a privileged pod targeted at a particular node, mount the local file system, and use it as you always have done. But in Talos itself, it's not there. Less avenues for CVEs and things like that as well. That's the main benefit.
Yeah, that's the security thing is also that.
Yeah, well, that is the next part is of course from how do you manage the security part of the kernel and Talos.
So like I said, we all of our operations are done via an API. That's a gRPC API protected by mutual TLS. You have the certificate, your cluster has the certificate, and that's it. That is, although it works, it's good and it's reasonable, it's probably one of the harder parts to manage, because if you want to give people access to your Talos cluster, you have to give them the token, the certificate that allows you to access it. So that's where Omni comes in. And Omni allows us to manage that for you. And then Omni gives you like either Google authentication, GitHub authentication, or if you've got a SAML provider, Active Directory, that sort of thing, it will hook into that. So you have an ACL list, and you can say these groups or these individual users, they can do this to these clusters, and that will maintain your authentication system completely separate from the cluster itself. It even goes so far now as if you write the RBAC in your cluster and you deploy your RBAC rules, we can map a particular user or group in your SAML provider to a particular RBAC rule set. And that way, that user in that cluster will be limited or allowed to do whatever.
Oh, that's awesome.
Rules, give you.
That's great.
So if, for me, like the less technical guy of the three, if people didn't notice already.
You're not a noob.
Not yet. No, I'm not a noob. But for me to get the general overview, is Omni like comparable to a Rancher setup?
Yeah.
Or is that dangerous what I'm saying?
I mean, Rancher is probably up there with like who we hear most about. Rancher does sort of two things. It obviously like manages deployment of your clusters and things like that, and it also manages your workload within that cluster. Omni doesn't do any workload monitoring, workload management at the moment. It's just operational cluster.
Just for Talos. Just for the OS.
We are already looking at day two stuff. Obviously, within the company, we have like fully managed services. So we have customers who just give us their boxes and tell us how they want clusters to be built. And we do that, and we give them the endpoint, and they then start running their workload on it. So we already have internally sort of a working day two operational structure. Yeah. So the next step is to commoditize that and figure out how we plug it into Omni, whether it's built into Omni, whether it's a separate product that's compatible with Omni. That's all ready to be done, but the guts of it pretty much done. One of the biggest things we have to decide is whether we want to give you a UI for it and take on all the development and all the support and maintainability of that, or if what we do is package Argo CD. So you hit a button, you get an Argo CD deployment in your cluster, and then you can go and create your repos and have Argo CD manage the thing. Sure.
Or maybe collaborate with one of observability tools. Yeah. One of the a lot.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, if we go down that route, it means we can pretty much, we could easily have it optional. We could have, we work with like Logic Manager guys and say, if you want a Prometheus stack, you press that button. If you want a Logic Manager stack, you enter in your license key or whatever they require, and it will deploy those resources for you. That's, again, like I said, it's all hopefully in the pipeline. We'd really like it to be able to do that. But we also are very, very, very much aware that we're only 9 people. So we want to make sure that what we do produce, we can maintain it and has a high quality.
Okay, well, it sounds very impressive for only 9 people.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we had, in the past, we had a Kubernetes OS called CoreOS. Did something like what you did, and I thought it was awesome, but it got destroyed when the way somebody bought it and thought about no, we're not going to do that. And
CoreOS is essentially our spiritual.
You're the spiritual successor.
Predecessor.
I was trying to think of the word, but no, we were like like I said, the CTO and founder. He was very much inspired by what CoreOS did, and very much in disagreement with how it did it. CoreOS and previously Container Linux. It was actually conceived of before Kubernetes was a properly big thing. It was like still very much in development and stuff like that. So it still had a lot of holdover from legacy, if we can call it, operating systems. It did the right idea of thinking, we run all of your processes in containers, we make configuration of that very, very simple. But they started with a regular legacy OS and took out everything that didn't help them with that. Talos has the same idea. It's where it all came from, but from the ground up. So the init system is something we've written in Go from the ground up. It has two other components, like an API layer for obviously API access and a trust daemon to ensure that the nodes, when they're joining a cluster, are who you expect them to be, and they can deal with the trust between the nodes properly and between the API calls. So although, we actually, I think a couple of weeks ago, we had, I don't know if it was the founder or the architect, but someone back from the early CoreOS days before they got bought out, actually hit up our CTO and say, hey, I'm loving what you guys are doing.
Awesome.
If you ever want some like architecture advice or just general calls or contacts, let us know. So that was like a really big validation for us. Like we've done the right thing and we've done it well. And he did say if he had the chance to do it over again, the way we did it is definitely the way he would have done it. But of course,
again, and it's a good topic because CoreOS went down because they got bought over, and then that company sacked it. For greater adoption, what is? You're 9 people. What is the chance you get bought over? And it's doing a similar route.
It's a question for the CTO and the CEO more than myself. I am but a lowly engineer.
Yeah, of course, but it's ringing in my head.
It's definitely a topic that gets brought up internally in the company reasonably often. One of the big things is our founder is a big proponent. Like I was saying, he's a big proponent of open source technology in general. If he were even to entertain an offer, just even theoretically, it would have to come with guarantees that Talos would stay as an open source operating system. Maybe even we work on getting it into the CNCF before like any sort of purchasing option comes up. I don't know really. I can't put words in his mouth, but
no, of course not.
Knowing the guy, that would almost be far more important than, for instance, how many zeros are on the check.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good to know, because if you want to adopt this and put this in your environment, put this in production, you need to have like 5-10 years of guarantee that it's running and it's doing its thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we all pretty much know about abrupt licensing changes that have happened recently. And there's nothing much more that we can do other than try and give our word. We are not enough contributors to be even considered for CNCF sandboxing at the moment, because obviously we do 90-95% of the work there. It is something we talk about internally in the company at least once a year, twice a year.
Yeah.
But for now, I can give you my word. I came in from the community.
For me, it's good enough.
Yeah, I came in from the community. It's all MPL licensed. It always has been MPL licensed, APL licensed, I should say, sorry. And for the foreseeable future, it will remain so. And it will take something gratuitously bad happening for that to change.
Okay. Well, and if I want to get started with Talos, where do I begin? Where can I? How can I? Download? Can I download it from your website?
Yeah. The main sort of documentation for Talos itself is on talos.dev. Super simple. Everything else is on GitHub. We have like the main core application and UI stuff all on GitHub. You can download the assets directly from there. We pre-build images for AWS, ISOs for USB booting, the pure init RAMFS and kernel if you want to do Pixie booting. It's all just on our package list on each release. We build it. Our CI pipeline is just pretty insane at the moment. Like I said, we had to actually create special tooling to deal with our CI pipeline because of how big and how complex it can get.
And it's only AWS, or do you support also Google? And
we support GCP, we support DigitalOcean, we support Vultr, we support Scaleway,
Azure,
we support Equinix Metal.
He's saving that for last.
If it can run Linux, it will run Talos.
Okay.
The biggest difference we have is whether we pull metadata from it and we have it as an automatic option. Okay. For instance, in in AWS, we aren't in the marketplace. We can't be. I can't remember why, but there's some bureaucracy behind not being in the marketplace. But we do have public AMIs. Same thing for Azure. We publish images, but for some reason we can't be an application that you just, point and click install.
Okay.
Not yet.
But for others,
Not yet.
yeah, I mean, for now, we get enough people interested, and that tends to be the biggest sort of blocker for us. It's people interested. We partnered up with an Equinix Metal some time ago, and we are like a simple available option there. If you wanted a bare metal box with Talos installed, you can literally just go through our website.
Oh yeah, bare metal. Do you have, just sparking, thinking about all things, on a bare metal system, we use MetalLB for our IP addresses outside. Yep. Do you have something like that? Or how do you...
we use MetalLB for our clusters.
Awesome.
We have KubeVip. We know that works with us as well. What we generally tend to do is advise that it's fantastic for your workload stuff, but probably not the best thing to do for your cluster, your API, your Kubernetes API endpoint. Although it can work for it, running your load balancer for your cluster in your cluster, if you have cluster issues, you then can lose access to your cluster endpoint. So although it can work and it can be configured, we generally advise against it. But
we do that with lots of our clusters, but we have system access. So we
so that's one of
that's the back door.
One of the things you have to sort of take in mind when you do using Talos, because you don't have that back door essentially into your operating system. You have to be a little bit more careful with which components you run inside the cluster and which components you run outside. We at the very birth of Talos, we actually made all of our components, all of the core components, self-hosted. So your etcd would be a static pod your kubelet would bring up, and that it just caused way too many headaches. It was great to be able to target a single sort of API and a single interface and a single way of doing things to have everything working. But we found out if anything goes wrong, you basically break everything. So by separating those two things out and running etcd and the smaller components outside of Kubernetes and letting everything else be inside, we get a lot better stability, a lot more reliability, and all of that good stuff. So we would say, if you're using Kube API, if you're using MetalLB, take that into account, and maybe not do it for your API, or if you do it for your Kubernetes endpoint, you just do it for a few non-critical components.
Okay. It's good to know. It's good to know. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're up to the final question. Where do you see the future of Kubernetes?
The future of Kubernetes, I would like to see pretty much, well, it's getting there. It's already commoditized. I would like to see it almost go away, in the sense of people don't mind that they don't care about they're running a Kubernetes stack. They want to be able to run their containers, run their processors, run their applications. And just because it's being managed by Kubernetes, it shouldn't really affect the workload. It shouldn't affect the developers. It shouldn't affect... You have to be aware of what you have available and your APIs and the environment you run in, but you've always had to be aware of that. It just changes which sort of environmental effects you have to be aware of. So, like we have done with the OS level, the OS has gone away. You don't care about your OS anymore. No. You just want to run Kubernetes. I would really like to think that Kubernetes will be so ubiquitous that it's just an API that is standard pretty much everywhere, and you just run your processes on it.
Cool.
Yeah, cool vision.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well,
we call that super tough.
Yeah.
Of course. Tim, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I've learned a lot. So
thank you very much.
Yep.
And I hope to see you in the future and talk about Talos and Omni more.
If we do well, hopefully we might even be sponsoring it.
Okay.
Cool.
Hold you to that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bedankt voor het luisteren naar de Nederlandse Kubernetes podcast. Ben je een vaste luisteraar en ben je nog niet geabonneerd? We vinden het super tof als onze luisteraars zich abonneren op de podcast. Heb je daarnaast een vraag over de podcast? Dan kun je ons bereiken op vragen@k8spodcast.nl of via de LinkedIn-pagina. Deze podcast is een initiatief van ACC ICT en wij zijn te beluisteren op onze website k8spodcast.nl via Spotify, Apple, Google Podcast en alle andere favoriete podcastproviders.